The lion lay where the grass thinned and the ground hardened, his body stretched awkwardly as if he had stopped moving without choosing to. Heat pressed down from above, settling into his coat, drawing moisture from the earth beneath him. His ribs showed faintly with each breath, the movement so shallow it barely disturbed the air. Flies gathered and lifted again, unsure. His tail lay still, the tuft dark against the dust. There were no others nearby. The ground held old impressions where many bodies had once rested, but those shapes had softened, edges worn away by time and wind. The pride had moved on, following cooler ground, following strength and momentum. What remained was this single form, too weak to rise when the group shifted, too slow to keep pace. The space around him felt larger because of the absence, stretched thin by silence. His breathing came unevenly, pauses lingering just long enough to suggest they might not resume. When they did, they arrived with effort, a soft pull inward, a slow release. His eyes were open but dull, unfocused, tracking nothing. Occasionally his ears twitched, responding to sound more out of reflex than awareness. The heat made everything heavier, thickening the air, pressing his body further into the ground. Scavengers moved at the edge of distance. Shapes circled far off, patient, reading the stillness. They did not approach yet. They waited for certainty. The lion's chest rose again, faint but visible, and the waiting continued. Time passed in small increments, measured by shadows shifting and insects tracing short paths across his fur. There were signs that this was not simply exhaustion. His flank tightened briefly, a tremor passing through his body before fading. His jaw worked once, opening slightly, then closing again without sound. Hunger had hollowed him, but something deeper held him there, something unseen that had slowed his body from the inside. Injury left no obvious mark. Illness left no clear boundary. Whatever had weakened him had done so quietly, over time. When footsteps finally approached, they were slow and deliberate. The people did not rush. They stopped well short, reading the ground, the angle of his body, the way his head rested too heavily against the earth. One of them knelt, careful to stay low, careful not to cast a sudden shadow. The lion did not lift his head. His breathing stuttered once, then resumed. They waited, watching for signs that might guide them. The lion's tail flicked weakly, a small movement that carried effort disproportionate to its size. His nostrils flared faintly as a new scent reached him. His eyes shifted, just enough to acknowledge change. A quiet voice followed, barely more than breath. "Easy," it said, not as command, not as reassurance, simply present. Water touched his mouth, cool against heat-dried skin. At first there was no response. Then his tongue moved, slow and uncertain, catching a small amount before retreating again. The effort cost him. His breathing quickened, then settled. Hands withdrew, allowing space, allowing his body to decide what it could manage. The sun continued its slow descent, light softening but heat still lingering. The scavengers kept their distance. The lion remained where he was, fragile, exposed, yet still breathing. What looked like an ending revealed itself instead as a pause, a moment held open by the faint, stubborn rise of his chest. Something was deeply wrong, undeniable in his stillness, but the quiet persistence of breath suggested that whatever had begun here was not yet finished. The days that followed unfolded with a strange steadiness. The lion remained where he was, close to the same stretch of land, never traveling far enough to lose sight of familiar contours. He did not rejoin the herd. Their distant movements marked the horizon once or twice, dust lifting and settling again, but he made no attempt to follow. Still, he did not vanish into the patterns that usually erase the weak. Each morning he was there. From a distance, rangers watched without interference. They learned his rhythm by waiting. During the heat of the day he barely moved at all. His body lay pressed into shallow shade, flank rising and falling slowly, conserving what little strength he had. Even the smallest adjustments were deliberate. A shift of the head. A slow stretch of one foreleg. Each motion ended with a pause long enough to recover from it. Weakness remained visible in his frame. His hips stood out more sharply now, the line of his spine clearer beneath his coat. When flies settled, he flicked them away only after several seconds, as if deciding whether the effort was worth the cost. Yet his eyes stayed alert. They followed movement. They narrowed against light. They did not carry the dull vacancy of an animal already gone. At night he rose. The change was subtle but consistent. As the air cooled and the land exhaled the heat of the day, he pushed himself upright. The first attempts were slow, his legs stiff, joints locking briefly before releasing. He stood still for a long moment after, head lowered, breathing carefully until the dizziness passed. Then he moved, not far, not fast, but with purpose. He walked toward water he knew. The path was uneven, worn by countless crossings, and he followed it without hesitation. At the edge he drank sparingly. A few swallows, then a pause. Another few. He did not lower his head fully. He did not linger. When he was finished, he stepped back and stood again, listening, scenting the air before returning to his place. Food did not come easily. He did not hunt. His body could not afford the risk. Instead, he waited, attentive to sound, to scent, to opportunity. When nothing presented itself, he lay back down without agitation. Hunger shaped him, but it did not drive him into reckless motion. Each choice reflected an understanding of limits, as if he were negotiating quietly with his own body. The rangers noted these patterns. They spoke softly when they spoke at all. "He's still choosing," one said, the words barely carried on the air. The observation lingered, not as hope, but as recognition. The lion was not simply enduring. He was deciding. Days passed with no dramatic change. Some mornings his rise was slower. Some nights he stood longer, taking a few extra steps before resting again. Once, he lifted his head sharply at a distant sound, muscles tensing, then relaxing when nothing followed. The land remained his anchor. He did not abandon it, and it did not abandon him. Scavengers continued to circle at a distance, cautious now. They sensed uncertainty. He was weak, yes, but present. When one moved too close, he raised his head and released a low sound, thin but unmistakable. It was enough. The space held. By the end of the week, the lion's movements had not grown strong, but they had grown consistent. He stood when he needed to. He rested when he must. The balance was fragile, but it was his. In the cooling hours before dawn, as the sky lightened and the night sounds faded, he lay facing the open land, breath slow and deliberate, still here, still choosing, not finished. The change was not sudden, but it was unmistakable. The lion's balance began to fail him in small ways. Where he had once stood through the cool hours of night, he now rested sooner, lowering himself with care that bordered on hesitation. His steps shortened. His breathing deepened, pulling harder at his narrow chest. The choices he had been making so precisely grew more limited, shaped now by a body that no longer recovered as it once had. The rangers noticed before the land did. From their distance, they saw the pauses lengthen, the nights shorten. He still rose, still drank, still turned his head toward sound and scent, but the effort left him drained. One morning he did not stand at all. He shifted, lifted his head, then let it fall back to the ground, breath heavy and uneven. The decision to intervene came quietly. There was no urgency in the movement that followed, no tightening of pace. They had learned his language by watching him, and they knew force would undo what little strength he had left. When they approached, it was on foot, wide arc, slow steps, bodies kept low. They did not surround him. They did not block his path. The lion watched them come. His head lifted, eyes alert despite the fatigue clouding them. His ears angled forward, then flattened briefly before easing again. He did not rise. He did not bare his teeth or coil his body in preparation to flee. He stayed where he was, chest rising and falling, gaze steady and unbroken. The air held still. Every movement was deliberate. When the first scent reached him, unfamiliar but not sharp, his nostrils flared. He drew it in slowly, testing. A hand extended, not toward his head, but toward the ground in front of him, letting the space carry intention rather than touch. A soft voice followed, barely sound at all. "We're here." What happened next was not dramatic. It was not the collapse they had prepared for, nor the sudden panic they had guarded against. The lion shifted his weight forward, inch by inch, forelegs sliding beneath him. He did not stand. Instead, he lowered his head until his chin rested against the earth, his neck stretched long, exposed. His body remained tense, but the motion itself was unmistakable. He offered stillness. The gesture lasted only a few seconds, but it redefined the space around him. This was not surrender in the way humans imagine it, not submission or trust as a concept. It was economy. It was an animal conserving the last of his energy by choosing the path that required the least resistance. He had measured the moment and responded in the only way his body could sustain. No one moved immediately. They allowed the meaning of the act to settle without interpretation. Then they continued, slowly adjusting position, keeping their presence predictable. When support was placed beneath him, his body yielded without struggle. His breathing steadied slightly, as if the effort of decision had already been spent. They did what they had come to do with the same restraint they had practiced all along. Fluids were given carefully. Relief, partial and temporary, eased some of the strain from his breathing. Throughout it all, he remained quiet, eyes half-lidded but aware, responding to touch with minimal movement. When it was over, they stepped back again, restoring space. The lion did not rise. He rested where he was, head still low, breath slow but present. The land seemed to exhale with him. What stayed with the humans was not the intervention itself, but the way it had been received. Survival, they realized, was not always defined by resistance or escape. Sometimes it took the shape of a choice made without drama, a recognition of limits, a willingness to remain. As the light shifted and shadows lengthened across the savannah, the lion lay quietly, body aligned with the ground, breath moving in and out with measured persistence. The wind passed through the grass, carrying scent and sound onward, while in that small held space, something essential had been seen clearly and would not be forgotten. The sound came low and distant, carried unevenly across the land. It was not urgent, not sharp enough to demand immediate response, and it would have been easy to miss. The lion heard it anyway. His ears shifted first, angling toward the source while the rest of his body remained still. For a long moment nothing followed. Then his head lifted, slow and deliberate, as though the movement itself required confirmation. He rose with effort that showed in every joint. The motion lacked the smooth authority he once carried, but it was controlled. His legs trembled briefly, then steadied. He stood in place, breathing deeply, allowing the dizziness to pass before taking a single step. The sound came again, closer this time, accompanied by the faint movement of shapes beyond the tall grass. Those watching expected him to conserve what little strength remained. Instead he moved toward it. Each step was measured. He did not hurry. He did not posture. His head stayed level, his tail low, his body aligned with intention rather than force. The distance he covered was not great, but it was enough to change the space around him. The air seemed to quiet as he advanced, the smaller sounds receding. The others noticed him then. They did not scatter. They did not challenge. The behavior shifted subtly as if recalibrated by his presence. Heads lifted. Bodies angled slightly away, not in fear but in acknowledgement. The lion stopped at a respectful distance, standing without tension, allowing the moment to settle. There was no sound from him. No warning, no display. His breathing remained slow, audible only in the rise and fall of his chest. His eyes stayed fixed, not hard, not unfocused, simply present. The weakness in his frame was visible, undeniable, but it did not diminish the clarity of his stance. The others responded in kind. Movement slowed. One stepped closer, then paused. Another turned sideways, presenting flank rather than challenge. The exchange unfolded without urgency, written entirely in posture and stillness. Trust in this context was not granted. It was negotiated through restraint. The lion lowered his head slightly, not a bow, not submission, but an easing of line that softened the space between them. He held the position, conserving energy, allowing his presence to speak without effort. The response was immediate but quiet. The tension that had hovered dissipated, replaced by a shared pause. No one advanced further. No one retreated. They remained as they were, bound briefly by the understanding that conflict would cost more than it could return. The lion's body swayed once, just perceptibly, and he adjusted his stance, grounding himself again. Still he did not withdraw. From a distance, the humans watched, careful not to intrude. They did not move closer. They did not speak. The moment did not belong to them. It belonged to the land and the animals moving within it, negotiating survival through choices that required no witness. After a while, the sound that had drawn him there faded. One by one, the others shifted away, not hurried, not alarmed. The space opened again. The lion remained standing until the last movement disappeared into grass and light. Only then did he turn. The return took longer. His steps shortened. When he reached the place where he had rested before, he lowered himself carefully, exhaling as his body met the ground. His breathing steadied. His eyes remained open for a time, tracking nothing in particular. What had unfolded was not a test of strength, nor a reclaiming of dominance. It was resolve expressed without demand, presence offered without expectation. As the light softened and the wind moved through the savannah, the lion lay quietly, having answered a call not with force, but with the simple decision to stand and be seen. The evening arrived gently, without demanding attention. Heat loosened its grip on the land, and the savannah shifted into quieter tones. Shadows stretched and thinned, settling into familiar shapes. The lion stood where he had rested, body angled toward the open grass, no longer watched closely, no longer measured moment by moment. His path forward remained uncertain. Strength had not returned in any dramatic sense. His frame was still lean, his movements still deliberate. Yet something had changed in the way he carried himself. He no longer paused as often to gather resolve. His head stayed level. His steps, though careful, followed one another with intent. The people remained at a distance as they had learned to do. They did not signal. They did not follow. Their presence was quiet, almost incidental now, as if they had already begun to fade from the story unfolding in front of them. They watched as witnesses, not participants, aware that this moment did not belong to them. The lion moved away from where he had been supported, guided only by his own balance and judgment. Each step took him farther from the familiar shapes of human stillness and closer to the layered sense of grass, soil, and unseen life. He paused once, nostrils flaring as the evening air carried information no one else could read. Then he continued. There was no urgency in his departure. No burst of energy meant to prove recovery. He walked as an animal walks when it trusts its direction more than its condition. His tail hung low, relaxed. His ears turned occasionally, tracking distant sound, then returned forward. The land accepted him without comment. Behind him, the people stood where they were. One shifted weight slightly. Another lowered their gaze. A soft voice surfaced briefly, no louder than the wind. He's moving on. The words were not an announcement. They were an acknowledgement. Then silence returned. The lion reached the edge of taller grass and slowed. The ground there was less worn, the paths less certain. He stepped into it anyway, body parting the stems, fur brushing against seed heads that bent and lifted again after he passed. His outline softened as the grass rose around him, breaking his shape into pieces of movement and shadow. He did not look back. What the people carried away was not a conclusion. There was no assurance of what would come next for him. They understood that survival did not promise permanence, only possibility. What stayed with them instead was the memory of restraint, of a creature choosing presence over collapse, movement over disappearance, not once but repeatedly. They had intervened only when necessary. They had stepped back when stepping back mattered more. In doing so, they had been allowed to see something rarely offered, the quiet determination of an animal navigating the edge of endurance without spectacle, without audience. As the sky deepened into muted color and the first evening sounds rose from the grass, the lion moved farther into the open land, his form dissolving into the rhythm of the savannah. Wind followed him, stirring the grass in slow waves, carrying scent and sound onward. The people turned away eventually, their movements unhurried, their silence intact. The story they carried was not theirs to tell loudly. It belonged to the wild, to the spaces between effort and rest, to a lion who walked forward under his own power as night began to settle, and the land closed gently behind him.